Good afternoon and welcome to one of our virtual lunch talks. I'm Sherry Crazel at the Miami University Art Museum, and I'll be handling the tech support for today's program. You will be muted through the program, and then you'll be given an opportunity at the end to ask questions, and we'll give you instructions when it's time for that. And I'll be turning the mic over to my colleague, Jason Shaman, Curator of Exhibitions, to introduce our guest speakers today. Jason.
Thank you, Sherry. And again, welcome everyone. Really pleased to introduce our speakers today. First, I just want to take a moment to again thank the Department of Art for the collaboration in producing the exhibition and the series of talks that our retired Curator of Education, Cynthia Collins, put together for us this semester. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tara Hayes and Todd Stewart, and just give you a little background about them. I'm sure they'll expound on it. Tara Hayes is a fine artist whose work primarily is in painting and 2D media. She's exhibited in Ohio and Boston, and her works are held in private collections. In 2017, Hayes earned a BFA in studio art and a BS in art education from Miami University. She's a recipient of the 2018 Yale College Artist Fellowship at the Dayton Art Institute. And in 2020, she earned an MFA from the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. And she currently lives and works in Pittsburgh. Todd Stewart is an artist, entrepreneur, and educator. He is the director of the Arts and Entrepreneurship program here at Miami University. He holds a BA from the University of Florida and an MFA and MBA from the University of South Carolina. He's worked in theater, design, and consumer goods as an entrepreneur. And he's exhibited in group shows in Cincinnati, Dayton, Atlanta, as well as internationally in Budapest. His first solo show was in the art lobby of the Department of Art in the fall of 2020. So now I'll turn things over to Tara to get us underway, and then Todd will follow right after. Tara?
Thank you, Jason, for that introduction. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. This is Hold on a second. Adam, hold on. I'm having trouble.
Tara, what's it telling you?
Hi, Sherry. So there's just a minor complication. The Zoom will not let me share my screen for some reason. So I think I have to quit and reopen. So just so that I don't delay anything.
Hold on just a second. Let me try making you a co-host. Stand by.
Okay. If she makes me a co-host, do you think that would work?
Okay, you want to try again, please?
Okay.
If you see the green share screen at the bottom.
Okay, let's see.
There you go. Sorry about that, Tara.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I got a little worried about that, but thank you. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Let me put that. Okay. Okay, can you see the screen all right?
Yes, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I I just want to thank Jason again and Sherry for the introduction and for the opportunity to come back as an alum and share my work and to participate in this virtual lecture series. It's really nice to be a continuous part of the community. This work is actually the work that's currently in the museum, so we'll get back to it, but I just kind of want to start with how I originally got interested in the arts and a lot of what my inspirations have been from the beginning, and then build up to where I currently am with this work. So as a starting point, I've always been drawn to the physical landscape and visually starting from aerial views and mapping terrain. And I've expanded on how I personally occupy a space and move through it. And these are some common and reoccurring themes in my practice. I tend to use visual languages related to physical mapping and a set of boundaries and rules with little elements of spatial distortion. And I use this form of topological manipulation to construct these visual spaces that are often and frequently overloaded. And each work is created in contrast to the experience of true spaces, but they represent an in-between perception of what experience and memory I encounter. And these photos I took with my film camera in about 2016 on a study abroad trip. And at the time, I was really interested in the smaller overlooked details that can be found organically in nature. And I was really drawn to the rich textures of rocks, hard surfaces, in which I was constantly tying back into my paintings. And I found something comforting in these features. I was drawn to the depth of the layers, the grooves and cracks in each form, and in which you can almost navigate them as a route or pathway. And these images were a foundational experience that eventually led into my painting exploration over time. And formally, my work is a blend of painting, printmaking, collage. And these ways of making also allow me to think in layers, to rearrange, experiment in the process of creating my work. And this is a drawing actually that I created early in my graduate degree. I had just moved to Boston. I wasn't familiar with the area, and I was really interested in perspective shifts within the landscape and how your eyes can shift between a bird's eye and what people formally call as a street view, and how you can potentially be both at the same time. And this drawing was my route back and forth from school, which eventually led to this project. I took these photos on specific sites that I would see, and pretty mundane things that I eventually incorporated into my work, but I was really fascinated with how you can also see things from multiple perspectives on the same plane. And this eventually led back to my first project in printmaking, which I titled Root. And this was definitely a new experience for me, since I had never really worked with printmaking in a way that was successful prior to this. And this collection of prints are collagraphs, and I was able to make them at the amazing facilities that MassArt has in printmaking. So that was a really special opportunity for me. And I'm going to go share a couple of the prints from this collection. So this is one of them. These collagraphs were made with 2 working plates printed on top of each other and rolled through a press twice. I love the contrast, color variation, and unique combinations that you can achieve with multiple plates. And these prints and the process of working and reworking each individual layer highly informed my painting practice, because I was able to separate these layers with the physical matrices that I was working on. So using gel mediums, using grit, using sand, they're all derived from these physical roots that I've taken and these daily repetitious movements. And these prints hold a moment in this active journey. And these prints can represent map-like topography and routes with origins specific to me, but not necessarily known or have to be known by the viewer. They are often derived from these observed landscapes that I map and manipulate until the original origins are so obscured beyond recognition. But there are traces of these places and that are captured and recorded. And this body of work captures those spaces, pathways, and the monotonous journeys of the in-between, similar to the photographs that I was taking. And this was eventually brought back into my painting practice. So in the beginning, like I felt like I was really having painter's block, and I was like the direction I was taking, felt very much more successful with my prints, just because it was something new and I wasn't thinking too much about where the work was going, which actually made it more successful. And I often work through abstraction of the physical space. So I finally felt with this painting that I was close to where I wanted to go, and it felt more complete than my prior painting work. And at the time, I was overworking my paintings and overthinking about how to talk about them rather than actually making the work itself. And for this work, I think I threw it all at the wall, to be honest. And I was revisiting memory and experience repetitiously. So I was really, really thinking about how I was doing and representing in this space. So this work is really my jumping off point for the current work. And it was necessary to do this work so that I could break out of my past habits. And my work often deals with contradicting these visual perspectives and a perceptual blur of the stability of a space. And the paintings have origins in the physical world, but they're capturing these in-between questionable stability moments. For example, like what is up, what is down, the imbalance of your visual observations. So for this painting in particular, I'm feeling like there's a question about what is the ground and what is the sky. So there's not necessarily a true landscape, but it's a landscape from my perspective. And at the time I was doing a lot of research and reading about maps, and specifically how people perceive these cities and interpret the maps from their own perspective, a way of cognitive mapping. I read a bunch of articles, some even looking at Stuart Davis's work about how you can be viewing multiple perspectives at the same time. And as a new Boston resident, I was ready to explore. And I took a lot of alternate routes to school as a way of creating this navigational game of mapping out this new space that surrounded me. And I began to see my paintings as a form of this navigational play where you can make choices and change decisions and have consistent changes on the canvas itself. So I followed the structure with rules and limitations, and I set boundaries of the landscape. So I'm bringing this physical aspect of actually walking around the space into my work. This painting in particular, I felt was closer to where I wanted to be, where I'm creating this board where the painting becomes its own landscape itself, and then the objects and characters and figures become the motion on top of this board. So almost like a game in particular, where you're moving pieces around the plane. This is an installation shot from my virtual thesis show. So due to COVID, my program went completely online, and we were able to do a virtual walkthrough gallery, which was actually a really fortunate and unique opportunity, because you can still walk through the space even though you weren't physically present there. And it was through a platform called Matrix. And it was still really special that we were still able to celebrate the work and really show it, even though we really weren't allowed to move due to lockdown. And now we are back at the painting that's currently in the museum. And this painting, they roll their own dice A, is part of a set of 3 works, and they're all in conversation with each other, but different modes of thought. So my painting decisions often come out of intuitively creating the work. So there are visual fields that have hidden clues, codes, and anchors that you can briefly latch onto, but you're never really there for a long amount of time. There are illegible maps, there are fragments, abstracted paths in a chaotically dense field. And these spaces are often overloaded and crowded and reflect my own observation of the landscape. So there are small details of memory, small details of experience that often pop up within the work. Sometimes they're related to color, sometimes they're related to directions or almost a randomness from what I see in my own environment. And these are the other two works. So there's B and C. And I find that the planes and the spatial perspectives are constantly shifting in my work. And sometimes they're more specific and sometimes they're more generic about my environment. And there are moments of being lost and found again and a distortion of focus. And I've always had this high spatial awareness as a person with epilepsy. And I see and observe these spatial moments through the lens of my condition. And there's a perceptual slippage between what memory and experience is. And I'm always trying to find the right way to talk about this influence in my work because it is very personal. And I've had this condition for the majority of my life. And this does not define my practice, but it's a fundamental piece of how I visualize and see the world. And in these works, so this is a detail shot, I'm fighting between spatial tension, building and layering paths and routines, and exploring my own relationship with my daily surroundings. So I'm compressing, shifting, and tilting the space within my paintings and collages. And there are structural influences of architecture, organic elements, and even mundane details found on these repetitious journeys. And I'm also using a variety of mixed media. So it's painting, pastel, colored pencil, in some cases, paint markers, and even prints from my printmaking practice make their way into the paintings. And this is another detail shot where there are more specific and varied instances where you can see that there's things in the foreground, things in the background, and things interacting with each other on the same plane. So this is the three of them together. And you can see like the conversation of the stylistic approach is very similar, but they are different modes and feelings and experiences at the same time. Almost like you're trying to play three different games and all of them have similar nuances, but they still have different ways of speaking and working. And so when COVID started happening, I had to make smaller work because, you know, I didn't have access to materials. And I think I actually benefited from this because I was able to condense my ideas, think about my work in a smaller scale, have a limited palette. So I began to make these perimeters, oftentimes of me walking around my own house, and created this play field of how you can make decisions and choices, even on a small scale. And I began to make these collages, and I feel like these speak to me, especially currently, because this is something I've really been focusing on, because there's such a high contrast and more limits than the boundaries I was setting previously in my paintings, that there's definitely more of a comfort in these spaces. And oftentimes thinking about choice and play within navigating the world. And often thinking about how not having choice or any control over your own physical space. So there's definitely a balance. So going back into my paintings, I began to think about them in this way, where they're on a smaller scale, where they're interacting more just on the plane and limiting my color. So these are some of the paintings that came out of those conversations and those themes. So I feel like condensing my practice and working through these ideas of wandering on a smaller scale actually was very, very helpful, but also helped me condense the broad depth that my paintings were trying to cover and speak to. So I even began imitating some printmaking practices into my paintings by carving into them, especially since I was working on panel for these 4 paintings. There's more of a durability that you don't get from using canvas. So back to some of these collages. So these are, they function as their own object and identity, and yet they are still inspiration for some future paintings to come. And I feel like they have a uniqueness, especially since the materials are layered in a way where it's still visible compared to the flatness of a 2D painting. And there's something simplistic about them that still has the layers and the perspective shifts that I've been looking for. And it is also nice to continue to use my printmaking materials, especially since I don't have access to a press at this moment. This is a collage wall in my studio. So I've begun using transfer paper, old clippings, new and found objects within my studio, photographs, which a lot of this I do want to continue and eventually bring back into my painting practice, but I'm focusing on these individually first, because I think my ideas will become clearer and come across. But they are reflected as similar to the collagraph process, where I can use them to inform my paintings. And a lot of them, you can take them apart and rebuild them to find new meaning, especially since now that I no longer live in Boston, I'm adjusting to a new place, and my surroundings are continuously changing, and it influences how the work progresses and speaks to my practice as a whole. So this is another set of collages. I really like the idea of making them more 3-dimensional on a 2D plane, so there's more depth and more space to work with, especially because it physically is there and you can continue to work through them, cut them up, and remake them. And this is a painting that I actually did for a commission recently. So this is, I guess, the starting point of me working back into the canvas. And this is a fairly long painting, but I feel that it still has remnants of the way I work, but also has a new feeling that is definitely different than the previous body of work. And I feel like I'm on the verge of breaking into a new series that is more revolved around these, and it will begin to open up my practice, especially in painting, because that is my original medium of working with. So I feel like all these other practices are really helping to inform my work as a whole, especially printmaking. You really have to focus on color choice and how the colors overlap compared to painting. You have all these options, and having to narrow it down can be more difficult than choosing 2 or 3 for a palette of a print. But it is exciting that your practice is always changing, and it's definitely a huge influence into how I work as well. And this is just a studio shot of what my studio currently looks like. And I just wanted to thank the Art Museum again for providing this opportunity, and the faculty and students that are turning in, and patrons of the museum as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Tara. So we'll go ahead and bring Todd.
Yes, I'm sharing my screen right now.
Wonderful.
All right.
Yeah, we see it now.
Okay, great. Jason, Sherry, thank you for including me. I think of my art now as being photographic based art, and I continue to evolve what type of art that I'm creating. So a little bit about me, as Jason mentioned, I teach arts entrepreneurship and arts management at Miami, though I'm not in the art department. So this is quite an honor to be included in the art department and alumni exhibition. My background is as a designer in theater and entrepreneurship, as Jason mentioned. I picked up photography in 2018 as a creative outlet. I needed something that I could have control of, something that I could spend time on. And I started taking pictures and have found that I really enjoy the medium. My work, as Jason mentioned, has been in shows across the US and abroad. And currently I have some work in the Art Museum and also some work in London that I'll show you at the end. So to start with, this is the work that's in the museum now, and I call this series Respect. And so this is actually pictures of my father's funeral. And he passed away sorry about that.
No need to be sorry, Todd.
I think I'll come back to that maybe at the end. So this is a project that I've worked on and actually was in my solo show. And it's called Demand Change. And I was up in New York at the Women's March in 2019 and was able to capture some interesting images. I found a poet that wrote some poetry about the suffragette movement in 1915. And I paired those with some images and I created a photo book. And these are all images from the march. And I just thought that it was a nice pairing of words and images, which is something I found I enjoy doing. Here's some other images from the book. And each one of these images is paired with one of Alice Stewart Miller's poems that she wrote. And I just love how strong all these women are. So my work so far is pretty documentary, going out and shooting my father's funeral, the Women's March turning into a photo book. And I have a series of what I call faces of just people that I know that I'm interested in capturing. And I'm really a little afraid of photographing people, oddly enough, even though all the photos you've seen are of people. I just think taking good portraiture is just so incredibly difficult. So I've enjoyed this practice of capturing people, mostly smiling. And I think what I'm trying to do is capture like these fleeting moments of emotion that happen that we kind of just kind of go by us so quickly. So this series of work is called Multiple Perspectives, and I've been doing this, I think, almost from the beginning. And I really like the idea of trying to find a subject, usually nature-based, where I can't capture exactly the emotion of the space or what I'm seeing in a picture. So what I try to do is combine multiple layers of photographs digitally into something that captures maybe what I felt when I saw the scene. Also, I'm really interested in motion and how, we see things typically in focus, but what's happening as, we move past a subject. So all of these combine different layers. And I think about them as different layers of reality. So this is actually, I think, 5 photographs that have been layered and color corrected and cropped. This is from a series. I actually have about 25 of these, and it's a combination of Oxford, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, and New York. And it's about this man's journey through life. This is the actual first photograph that started this series. These are 2 photographs in the same forest area in Ohio, but from 2 different perspectives. And I like to try to play with contrast, I think, a lot in these. I don't really, I manipulate all the photos. I mean, if you look at Ansel Adams' work, he manipulated photographs in his dark room. And I think that, as an artist, you get to take whatever liberties that you want with the work. This is one from my show at the Art Lobby, my solo show. It's called Peace. And it's probably 4 or 5 photos. And you can see I introduced some motion in the top, kind of in the shadows, and introduced some color from another photograph. So I build these up in layers, and I don't plan these at all. These are not planned. In fact, really none of my work is what I would call planned. It's more of I have an image, I react to it, I remember what it was like in that moment, and I start putting things together into collages. I really appreciated hearing Tara talk about how she thinks about work, and I can see some things in my work from listening to her that I think I'm trying to do and I wasn't able to articulate before. So I jump around a lot with my work. I don't know that there's really a through line to it. This is a group of photographs that combines some of my work with some haikus that I wrote, going back to that idea of image and words. And of course, my name's Todd, but Toto in Japanese means haiku. So I named the series that. So these are, actually, I wrote the haiku. In this case, I wrote the haiku and I found a picture that I felt like worked with it. And in this case, I actually had a photograph and wrote a haiku based on the photograph. So a lot of my work right now, since I'm new, is just experimenting with different medium or different ways of applying photographs to art. And the next group, something I'm really excited about, it's called Triptych. So 3 images that you put together that are interrelated or speak to each other, though these aren't really what I would call triptychs in the sense because they're more of the multiple perspectives, the layering. So these are approximately 12 by 20, and I haven't finished this project yet, but I'm going to print these and mount them and create photo encaustics. And I'll talk a little bit about that. That's something I've just started, and I'll show you an image at the end that I'm working on. But again, I'm taking multiple pictures. I'm creating collage. Some of these are layered. Some of these are just single photographs as we go through. So as a designer, with my background designing scenery, lighting, costumes, props for set, part of what I like about my work is I think my design background certainly comes through. And a lot of times what I'm trying to do is design a interesting, provoking image to me, and hopefully it resonates with people who view it. My next experiment I want to talk about, let me check the time. I think we're good. I've got a pinhole lens for my camera, and so that allows light in, but you can't control the aperture. And I started playing with this idea of motion again. I like to blur and try to create more emotion, or the emotion that I see in the scene, by creating blur. And also, this is experimental in the sense that I don't know what I'm going to get until I download the pictures to my editing software. And that kind of interests me because I'm finding, I think, some meaning in the work in the post-production of it. So with these, it seems like this is there, but when we just take a look at this scene, it looks completely different. But this world exists. It's this world in motion that I'm trying to capture. I sometimes wonder if I like this motion technique so much because I can't really learn how to focus a camera, which is true in some respects, I think. So I just want to show you a bit of recent work and talk about how I got to where I am and where I really started. So I was in Florida working on a film this past summer, and you can't help, if you have a camera, but try to take some landscapes. This, I think, is an okay picture, okay image. It certainly doesn't capture what I saw that day. And that's one of the things that I find limiting to me about like pure landscape or pure photography, is that I can't really capture what the emotion of the scene. The reason I got into photography is I thought I wanted to do epic landscapes because I love landscapes, and certainly a lot of my work is landscape based. But to do this well, you have to be very technical and really worry so much about settings, and that's just not the kind of work that I do. But I still enjoy this type of work. But I think I started with trying to do epic landscapes, and I think I've certainly moved away from that. Here's just a couple others. So this is actually a Florida landscape too, but I've done some digital manipulation. I typically don't do any Photoshop on these. So this is purely in Lightroom, which is a photography editing program. So what I do is I work on the color and saturation, contrast. There are some effects in there, but I don't put it in Photoshop. I don't know, that just is a step that I don't really need to do. but I do like manipulating images. And that takes us to sort of what I'm working on now. I mentioned photo encaustics earlier. So photo encaustics is a process where you mount a photograph to wood or some surface, and then you apply layers of wax. You can do collage with the photograph. You can scratch the surface. You can add color with oil paints or different types of media. And I think the middle one, you can see a little bit more. This photograph doesn't capture, but what I like about it is, again, it's building up layers. It's creating what I think is more representative of how I felt when I was taking the photograph. So these photos are from about 1.5 years ago, but these 3 pieces are my most recent work, and they're currently hanging in London at the London Bridge. So I'm excited about this, and I've got my studio set up to do this process, and I look forward to continuing on this. So that's me. That's my website and my Instagram if you want to follow my work. And yeah, so that's it. I don't think I'll circle back around to my work at this point, but thank you again, Jason, Sherry, and Department of Art for including me in this show.
Well, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Tara. It's always wonderful to see and to get insights in the working process of artists, because what we see on the walls or in cases is the finished product, but what really led to, what really built up that body of work. So it's very exciting. I want to see if we do have any questions. We do. So first question, I'll go ahead and field for Tara. It says, hi, Tara, I love your work. You shared your visual and emotional inspiration for your work. But would you say there are any artists whose work has inspired you throughout your career?
Yes, thanks for the question. I guess at the beginning of this series that I've made, I've looked a lot at Stuart Davis's work, because his work does shift a lot prospectively. His work is more, has a cubism vibe to it a little bit more than mine does. But definitely the way he talks about his work, I'm very interested in. I've also looked at contemporary artist Michael Williams, who does a lot of work about memory in his paintings. And then Michelle Stewart is also interesting because she takes on more of an intimacy with her landscape, even though our work is drastically different. I'm intrigued by the way she looks into it.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, you know, with your collage in particular and mentioning cubism, I see connections with the synthetic cubism, kind of the second wave that Picasso and Braque created of using the layering and pulling materials together of mixed media. So I definitely see some of that in there. Thank you for that. Another question for Todd is, I'd love the tree layered image that you said started the layered series. And how much time would you say it took you to create that collage? And did you teach yourself? You know, you say, you know, not using Photoshop. How did you go about making?
Yeah, I can't make Photoshop work. So a lot of my layering, I use Canva, which is a really simple, sometimes you have to worry about resolution with that, but it's a simple way just to layer photos. How much time did that, boy, I don't, you know, those are, I looked at a lot of different iterations, I think, of that one. The layering itself didn't take long, but editing each photograph first and then seeing a connection between them and testing different contrast, because there's a lot of contrast in ones looking down. So testing those. Sometimes I create a layered image in about 5 minutes. And then sometimes it doesn't take me more than maybe an hour to create it. But because I do these different iterations and thinking about it, it takes a lot of time. That one I want to print out about 4 feet by 5 feet and make it large. So it was down part of Photo Focus, and it did get printed out on a wall on the side of a gallery down there. So it was cool to see it at scale, which was the intent of it.
Yeah. So now that you're, working with Encaustics, hopefully you're being careful with that rather toxic
I am
use of the wax.
I'm trying.
I look at what you were doing with those 3 pieces, the floral pieces, and obviously the layering of the wax with the encaustic is toning down the color.
Yeah.
So how do you go about looking at what particular colors of flowers, and do you consider how the wax is going to affect those, or is it just more of the result and seeing how the two media work together?
I probably should do all of that, Jason, but I really don't. And it's learning and iteration. Like next time I might print certain photographs, I might change the contrast or the color or the white balance a little bit to make things pop, because I have a sense of what it can do. But I entered this competition saying I was going to do photo encaustics without ever having done photo encaustics. Right. So that's just, I'm crazy like that. So it got me motivated to do something I've wanted to do, but certainly in the future, I'll try to incorporate that, I think.
I think it's interesting when artists are pushing themselves that way, and
Yeah.
Tara, you definitely, presented that as well, is pushing in ways out of your comfort zone. So not to be personal about it, but obviously, especially like being in Boston and moving to Pittsburgh, different environments, in trying to find that comfort zone in creating your work. What other influences are there that help you make that bridge?
A lot of times, like obviously when you move to a new place, you don't really either recognize places or really have a feel for the space. And in the beginning, usually I'll run or walk around wherever I'm living, or specifically go to a place. But sometimes it just comes in mundane situations. I think it just kind of depends on what I end up observing at the end of the day. But it's definitely, it varies, especially because once I sort of have a ground, then the actual painting comes into play, because then that becomes its own conversation off of what my experiences and memory start from as like the driving force. So it's definitely a continuous almost discussion of the painting itself, where the painting consistently is having these repetitive conversations.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Thank you. We do have a few other questions that have come in. This one's for Todd. How do you or other career influences, such as theater, designer, and entrepreneur, impact or work their way into your artistic work?
Yeah, that's interesting. I can't separate my years in theater from my work. I mean, in theater, you learn to be a sculptor, you learn to be a painter. You're really a visual artist in 2D and 3D. You're also an architect, an engineer. So I think all of that plays into my interest of doing things. So you don't see one style, I think, with my work. And Rob Robbins, the chair of art, said when he saw my solo show, there are 2 different walls and the work was so different. He said, Todd, I thought it was 2 different artists. And I think because, my training, my artistic training anyways in theater, you have to be able to move between different genres and different styles from realism to abstraction. So I'm comfortable doing that. And, jumping in and trying something is what entrepreneurs do. And so I'm not like with the Encaustics, I wasn't afraid to make that leap, even though I'd never done it before, because that's just sort of my mindset.
Yeah, fantastic. Another question from David Parsons. I'm a digital artist and visiting professor at Miami in the ETBD program, the department, the Emerging Technology in Business and Design. Sometimes I get a weird vibe from practical artists. Do you find that to be a prevalent opinion? So I guess maybe throw that to both of you from your perspectives. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll say, I think it's out there, like, but true artists, in my opinion anyway, look at the world and see all different kinds of art. Yes, sir. I see it in some photography that if you're not doing sort of one vertical, like you're a landscape photographer, you're a portrait photographer, but the reality is that we are multidimensional and multi-talented. And so to pursue our work in those different ways, I think is exciting. I love Tara's multimedia work, and she's certainly what I would think is a practical artist, but she crosses across different sort of arts disciplines. So I mean, I'm sure it's out there, but I don't worry about it too much. I just do what I want to do.
I guess going off that, for me, I think I don't like being categorical about my work, or in like as in art practice in general, because I think it almost limits you in a way where maybe you want to say, yes, I'm a painter and I'm always going to be a painter, but you're kind of limiting yourself to seeing like, oh, maybe if I did, XYZ, that'll come back and influence my work in a new way, in a new light. So it kind of keeps, I guess, your practice or your work more entertaining in that way, where you're always going to find something new that you wouldn't have necessarily found if you only worked in painting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I've really enjoyed with the current exhibition, is that a number of artists have really explored other medium that, from when they were students or when, their original disciplines. And I think that's exciting. Again, it kind of can push you out of your comfort zone, but as Todd said, it can be exciting. And I think for artists, I think it's probably important for you that you need to have that excitement.
Mm-hmm.
For both of you, what can happen? I think Terry, you talked about when you had that painter's block, mm-hmm. and how you worked through it. Are there other ways that you can try to push yourself beyond a certain point? But what happens when it doesn't work the way you intend? Where do you go from there?
Well, I guess in response to that, I think it's okay to fail or to have failure in your practice. I think it's a necessary component. But for me, I guess sometimes when I'm having like painter's block, I find that writing is actually a really useful tool, because, sometimes it's not all about, making the work or having a stylistic approach. I think sometimes you have all these ideas in your head that oftentimes come out either as verbal or visual. And sometimes writing a paragraph down or writing small little words will kind of be a jumping off point, especially since as artists, we often forget why we're making work in the first place, especially when we do have painter's block. But that's definitely something that I've used in my practice to kind of keep the flow going.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I don't know if there's any additional questions. I know we're coming up on the end of the hour. And really greatly appreciate both of you, obviously, for one, being in the exhibition and contributing your work. I think it's contributed significantly to the overall understanding, as museum patrons coming in to seeing the caliber of work that's produced by our faculty, our emeriti faculty, and our alumni, to see, where they, artists are going. I think it's a real great testament to the Department of Art, and says a lot about the faculty that have inspired many of the alumni. But we really appreciate you sharing your insights, sharing your bodies of works with us. And we hope to see you in the galleries again soon, and check up and see what additional work you're creating as you move forward.
Yeah, thank you so
Jason.
much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sherry, for all of the tech in making this happen.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I enjoyed both your presentations.
Yeah. Take care.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.